Truly for me, it's about what's best for our kids.
Coming up, why Representative Lynn Gattis believes schools with fewer than 25 students should be closed, and why one Bristol Bay teacher is fighting back.
They deserve a school as much as any other student in the state.
Students pull together to send Representative Gattis a pointed message.
Changing the law would change a way of life. Ahead on Frontiers, we take you to Twin Hills and Clarks Point to show you what every Alaskan will lose if rural villages keep losing their schools.
Sponsorship for Frontiers with Rhonda McBride is provided by Kupik Corporation and Spenard Builders Supply. Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers, with challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief the best is yet to come, bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome to our program. You know, we live in a state where some schools are so small and isolated that they've teetered on the edge of closure for years. In some cases, all it would take is for one family to move away for a school to fall below 10 students, the minimum required to receive state funding. Representative Lynn Gattis and some other lawmakers want to raise that bar even higher, up to 25. That's why we sent KTVA's Daniela Rivera to Bristol Bay, and she joins us now with what basically is a tale of two villages.
That's right. We're going to take you to Clarks Point and Twin Hills, two communities both fighting for their schools, but each with a story of their own to tell. Clarks Point is on the shores of Nushagak Bay, about 15 miles from Dillingham, home to about 40 people. 3 years ago, the number of students there fell below 10. Twin Hills is a community near Togiak with more people and students. They have 22 enrolled in their school. Both communities tell me raising the threshold to 25 students would threaten a lot more than just their schools. For the 80 people who call Twin Hills home, life here is quiet. Except for maybe the sound of a four-wheeler as fresh pike hangs to dry, a reminder that people here live off the land. At the heart of the community, a two-story brown building, the school, but it's the children who bring it to life. Megan Redmond is the head teacher. She had only planned to stay for a year when she moved to Twin Hills. That was 6 years ago.
Hi. We only have 22 students, so we greet every single student in the morning when they come in with a good morning, with their name. We know every student so well.
Every school day starts with the Pledge of Allegiance, first in Yupik, then in English.
With liberty and justice for all.
Kindergarten through 8th grade students learn here.
Right above the picture.
Math, science, language arts.
Please open up your books.
Classes Redmond believes these students should get, even if there's only 22 of them.
Word one, what word?
Right.
They deserve a school as much as any other student in the state.
When she learned some lawmakers wanted to stop funding schools with less than 25 students, she started the Small Schools Matter campaign on Facebook, collecting pictures from rural schools across the state.
The whole point behind that was to get the students' faces out there so that everyone can see who this is really going to affect. It's going to affect the kids. It's going to affect their families. And those are the things that get forgotten sometimes, I think, when we start talking about money.
She also organized community letter writing events. These are letters from parents, community leaders, and students.
Dear Representative Gattis, I don't want our school to close ever, never ever, because I love school.
Words she hopes lawmakers take to heart.
Do I have to move? Do we have to go to a whole different school?
Before making a decision about their future.
Can you imagine Twin Hills without the kids?
Yes, it doesn't look good without the kids. We need that. We need to keep those schools open.
As vice president of the Twin Hills Native Council, William Alutsek knows once a school dies, keeping the village alive is next to impossible.
As you can see, there's Alaska is dotted with a lot of small villages, and it's part of being Alaska, you know, small villages.
Losing the bright lights of their very own piece of Alaska is hard for the elders to think about.
It'd be like a ghost town, more or less. Go by the school and say, oh yeah, kids used to play there.
For another Bristol Bay village, that fear became their reality 3 years ago.
I don't think I can live anywhere else. I mean, there's only like 34 people here, and as far as I'm concerned, this is the heart of the world.
And hearts broke when Clark's Point's enrollment fell below 10, the state's minimum requirement for funding schools.
Well, it was devastating.
Mariano Floresta says the Native Council pleaded with the Southwest Region School District to keep their school open, even after they lost the state's money.
When they closed it down, they pulled all the computers, all the books, everything out of the classrooms.
Now this $2 million building sits cold and boarded up, deteriorating every day.
Here I go.
The playground is all that's left at the school for kids in Clark's Point.
We love living here. We love living off our land and our being native and our way of life.
Betty Wasilla had to send one of her children away for school and is trying to homeschool the rest.
You guys have seen how it's hard to keep 10 students. If that number went up to 25 and you had to have 25,
oh my goodness,
what would
that
happen?
would be a real bad situation because lots of the other little villages around here would get shut down. And you know, I always wonder about what happened to that No Child Left Behind Act. I feel that my children are left out, and we can't move away. We don't have enough money to just get up and go.
Come on, Sam, you could do it.
Raising the threshold could keep this school closed forever.
The kids you see now are, you know, what we have, and we're trying to actually recruit more people to move back so we can open the school.
For now, the children left in Clark's Point play.
Sit right here.
An old metal shelf makes a perfect sled. They're smart and resourceful, and their community doesn't want to see them fall through the cracks.
At one time, I was really proud of our school. I remember being 3 years old and it being built and thinking, wow, you know, we get to go to school there. And I wish my kids I wish there was still a school that they can go to and have that actual school and teachers.
The loss they feel watching children and families move away could one day touch many other villages, like Twin Hills.
You know, it would eventually, slowly, you know, close up and people would move out and there'd be a lot of empty houses and there'd be no kids running around, period. You know, that's not right.
What is it? Place value.
They're thriving now, hoping their way of life will survive.
Another nearby village in Bristol Bay, Portage Creek, lost their school in 2006. By 2010, their population of 36 had decreased to 2.
That is pretty dramatic there. Well, it sounds like you had a very memorable trip in which you were able to put a face on the problem.
Exactly, and this was my first time going to a village, and what made it a great experience was the people. They were so welcoming, just let us into their homes, shared their stories with us, and my favorite part, the kids. They were great, truly the light of the community. You can see it the minute you get there. That's little Nicole. She was our guide and wanted to help Andy with his camera. But really, they were the best part.
I love how they always want to help. Well, if you love Danny's story, you have a chance to see more next week.
That's right. We're just getting started. This is a big conversation. It affects all of Alaska, not just these rural villages. We have a 3-part series starting tomorrow night. It runs Monday through Wednesday at 6 and 10. And we're going to take you to Dillingham as well, a hub community, and that's where some of these students move to for school once their school and village shuts down. We're going to meet a student who that's where he went. He went to Dillingham after his school shut down, and his village is no longer there. So
lots of ripple effects. So thank you, Danny. Well, up next, one lawmaker says the time has come for Alaskans to start making tough choices.
But at this time in our budget, I'm going to use the word crisis. I'm okay with that.
Why Representative Lynn Gattis says closing some schools might be best for the kids. Plus, schools on the edge, how changing the law could impact the Southeast Island School District. We'll hear from the superintendent of that district next. As the state's fiscal crisis deepens, that pushes Alaska's smallest schools closer to the edge of extinction. Some lawmakers say it's a discussion we need to have sooner than later. Whenever the budget is a bear, rural schools are apt to feel the biggest bite. And some rural communities perceive Representative Lynn Gattis as a Bruin, breathing down their backs. But Gattis sees herself as a mama grizzly.
Truly for me, it's about what's best for our kids.
Gattis believes rural communities on the edge of economic survival sometimes have an agenda.
Schools are the employer in those small communities. That's what keeps that small community from drying up. If it wasn't the school, so it's adults looking out for adults rather than what's best for kids.
Gattis's plan to limit eligibility for state funding to schools with at least 25 students has some Alaska natives worried.
What we're going to see is the schools that end up closing are schools in rural Alaska. Schools in communities where people have lived for thousands of years.
Representative Sam Keto says it hurts children to take them away from their culture.
In the current situation, by closing so many rural schools, it does feel very discriminatory towards Native Alaskans.
They don't understand that I literally grew up in the bush.
Representative Lynn Gattis grew up in a family of teachers. Her first 8 years of education took place in a 2-room schoolhouse in Gakona. Gattis also spent many years in Bristol Bay, running airlines, and says she's seen how schools, which struggle to stay open, often fail their students, and parents need to put their kids first.
If they move somewhere else, is that good for kids? If they move somewhere where they have jobs, where kids have great schools, that's best for kids.
It costs money to move. You got to have first and last month rent. You got to have the resources to move. So if a family doesn't have the resources to move to get their kid an education, what then?
You know, it's part of the whole bigger conversation.
A conversation, Gattis says, the whole state needs to have.
Certainly didn't mean to scare people, but at this time in our budget, I'm going to use the word crisis. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with putting it out there and letting folks know we can't continue it the same way we've been throughout the state.
Gattis says closing schools on the edge would save the state more than just education dollars.
How much would we save in septic, sewers, DOT budget, grading runways, and so on and so forth? It's a much bigger conversation. If a community goes away, there's a large savings.
Other lawmakers say the state has a constitutional obligation to provide all students in Alaska with an education.
So, Article 7.
But Gattis says that's not what her reading of the Constitution says.
The legislature shall, by general law, establish and maintain a system of public schools open to all children of the state. And so what you see is there's nothing in this Constitution that says it should be 10 kids or 15 kids.
In Juneau, once again, the perennial chicken and the egg type of question, which comes first, kids or community, or are they both one and the same? The lawmakers had a visit this week from Megan Redmond, the Bristol Bay teacher that we introduced you to earlier in the program. She took a group of students to Juneau, and they met with Representative Lynn Gattis and delivered letters from the community of Twin Hills in opposition of school closures. Redmond says being at the Capitol was an eye-opener for the kids.
But it's totally different to be here. It's so fun to see them finally understand and get exactly how our government works.
Just as the Bristol Bay region, the Southeast Island School District would be one of the hardest hit if minimum enrollment is bumped to 25. Well, Lauren Birch is superintendent of that district, and he joins us from our sister station in Juneau. And he's going to tell us a little bit to start off, Lauren, by giving us a sense of where your district is and what's unique about it.
Well, we're deep in Southeast, primarily on Prince of Wales Island, but we have a school on the bottom tip of Baranof and one on the Canadian border below Ketchikan. It would probably be about a 3.5-hour float plane ride from one end to the other if you get a flight that would do that. So it's pretty remote. Several of those sites are boat in or small plane fly in only.
Now we have a graphic to show you a profile of your district. Tell us about the number of students, teachers, schools.
Well, we have 9 schools. 8 of those would close if it went to 25 students. So it would, of course, devastate, 8 communities in my district.
Now you have just under 200 students. To have them scattered so far, that's got to be pretty challenging. Do you think maybe there's room for some consolidation there? Is it possible?
We have closed schools before, and kids tend to vanish. But it's very difficult because you can't get in a small boat and commute 4 hours to a different school. It's even on the road system that we have, those schools are often more than 2 hours away from anywhere else.
Now, as superintendent, I understand that you've had to close schools in your district before. What's that like?
Oh, it's very painful for the community, and they more or less dry up. We just closed Edna Bay a couple of years ago, and when it dropped then the student count, and right now I don't think there's one student left in the community, and the school's boarded up, and we pulled all the stuff out, and it's all somewhere else.
So how does that feel emotionally to go into the community and do that?
Well, it's very, very painful to sit down with several parents and tell them, I'm sorry, we're not going to have a school for you, and you're going to have to figure it out on your own.
Well, that is pretty tough. Well, many lawmakers say that our fiscal situation, our back-to-back multi-billion-dollar budgets are going to get worse before they get better. So they say we should start having a conversation about what to do. What do you think we might consider doing?
Well, for one, many of these small schools are quite successful. There's 60 some schools under the gun, and they're all very, very different. I've always advocated for, a funding that was full funding for 10 and 90% for 9 or whatever, because you can never know exactly how those numbers are going to run in October.
So how volatile does it get? I hear that some schools just go up and down. They try to recruit families.
Well, sure, it can go, Kaufman Cove, we just had last year, they had 20 some students. I don't think it was quite 25, but this year they're down to 13. Families come, families go, things happen, and it's very, very difficult to predict.
So how do you handle that if suddenly one goes below the threshold currently of 10?
Well, in the current situation, you'd end up having to carry that and rob money from other parts of your other schools in your district to make it go.
Now, people in your district are very, very proud of what it's accomplished despite its size. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the unique programs you have?
Yeah, to keep our schools open, we've really tried to be responsive to parents and what they need. We went to a 4-day school week because that's what parents wanted. Half of the Fridays teachers work. They're available for kids and tutoring. We do, we're on the road system where they have swim lessons. We do those on Friday. We have scuba. We have welding. We've gone heavily into greenhouses so that kids can raise their own things. They can run a business and have, essentially kind of have a job where they, learn how to, manage money and manage a greenhouse. And there's a lot of science and a lot of education that goes with that too.
Now, one thing I've heard is that your school has a 4-day program where schools don't go kids don't go the full 5 days. How does that work?
It's very effective. The teachers have more prep time then because every other Friday is a teacher work day, and we move a lot of those other kind of activities to Fridays to where they're not necessarily taking up time out of the class time. It's been hugely successful, and our schools are remarkably successful.
Well, Representative Gattis has said she's concerned that schools that are struggling to meet that threshold of 10 and even 25 are offering a substandard education. What do you say to that?
Well, it's just silliness. You can look at, I can only speak for my small sliver of the world, but we're quite successful at it, and are discouraged when you hear that kind of talk. I mean, I think small schools can be successful, and should be.
So, what do you think the approach should be to change hearts and minds in Alaska about this issue?
I think exactly what you're doing, that profiling those communities where people can see what it's like to be there and what that is for the kids. And it's pretty hard to close a school when you look at those little guys in the eye and ask them what they think.
All right, well, we want to thank you, Lauren Birch, who is superintendent of the Southeast Island School District. Thank you for traveling all the way from Thorn Bay to Juneau to help us broaden the conversation. And still ahead, Governor Bill Walker has weighed in on this conversation. Liz Raines joins us from the halls of the Capitol to give us a look at how far this proposal might go. So far, no bill has been introduced to raise the state's minimum student enrollment to 25. We now go to our eyes and ears in Juneau, our Capitol correspondent Liz Raines, to find out whether or not this proposal has legs.
Increasing the minimum enrollment for keeping schools open in rural Alaska is sparking a lot of attention here in the Capitol. Even those who say they're open to closing some schools say they're against an across-the-board mandate. More than support, there's outspoken opposition. The idea of a bill here isn't getting much traction. Department of Education Commissioner Hanley says the proposal doesn't make sense, closing schools and potentially entire communities for a few $1 million. Higher up in the administration, the opinion's the same. Governor Walker says it's an idea he couldn't sign off on. So even if a bill did make its way up the legislative ladder, that buck would likely stop here.
And that was our Liz Raines reporting from the Capitol. Well, we have some feedback from last week's show. We heard from John Sturgeon, the hunter, who took his fight against the National Park Service all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Our guest for the show was Professor Steve Haycox, who teaches history at UAA. Sturgeon disagreed with Haycox's analysis of how the Federal Organic Act of 1916 supports the Park Service's case. And he also said, my lawsuit will have cost $650K, not something that the average person could do. It's not something I could have done without the help of a lot of Alaskans. So when an expert says things that are not correct, it is really upsetting to those of us that support the case. Well, in response, Professor Haycox says he understands Sturgeon's displeasure over his remarks, but he says that they are based on legislation. Haycox also says he respects the magnitude of Sturgeon's undertaking. Well, there's going to be no debate about next week's show. Love is always a hot topic, no matter how far north you go.
I love to go deliver flowers because I get hugs.
Well, next Sunday, we're going to take you to Nome for Valentine's Day to visit one of the farthest north flower shops in the United States where love blooms despite the Arctic chill. And we'll also tell you about a love story. I'm going to tell you it'll break your heart, but you don't want to miss hearing about it. Well, it's time to bring this week's show to a close, but we do hope that this conversation about those schools on the edge keeps going. You know, these are the kind of challenges that make Alaska what it is. We'll see you next week.